Okay, so I'm basically going to effectively be guided by the entire magazine that I ended up writing, explaining summarising in brief the most important bits of this new stuff, plus Apple's new features page. So, but I want to primarily be driven by what people are interested in rather than going. I'm not going to try and go over everything Apple announced. As I mentioned in my article, there's simply too much of it. It took Apple 2.5 hours to very quickly summarise it, and we do not have time for that. So I'm more interested in covering any general questions that people have got, or sort of thinking ahead about what to expect and planning and that sort of thing. Now, as I've already mentioned, we are already planning to have a meeting next month, which is specifically going to look at the issue of dealing with old software that won't work anymore. And I'm wanting to cover several options for how to approach that problem while still being able to move forward, because I've encountered in my many years of supporting WelMac members and other people, I've encountered many cases of people getting stuck on a very, very old operating system. It gets to the point where it becomes unusable because they can't access the web properly anymore, and just because they've got one application that they really can't avoid running, or it's too complicated to move on to something else. So I want to try and give people options for how to avoid that sort of problem and find ways to move forward, or consider some options to consider anyway. I'm not suggesting you rush into new operating systems. Okay, so I'm not going to go over the new hardware because I don't imagine, is there anybody here interested in buying a new Mac Pro? That includes me. Well, let me rephrase that. Can anybody realistically afford to buy a new Mac Pro? You presumably read my brief summary, so we're talking starting price 10 grand ballpark, and then going up to more like 100 grand if you actually want all the features. So no, I don't. Even if I wanted one, I wouldn't want to waste money on one. So, as I sort of covered in my article, it's quite clear that Apple is doing a lot of parallel development and stuff this year. They've got a lot of features, not necessarily all new features, but they have got a lot of new stuff which is simultaneously appearing on every platform. This is something we haven't seen all that often. We quite often find that iOS gets something, then maybe a year later the Mac gets a limited version of it or something like that. But there's been quite a lot there will be quite a lot this time round that the same feature set or very close is coming to everything at the same time. And one particularly major one is the new development stuff that they're introducing, particularly this thing called Swift UI, which allows developers to write either brand new applications or add parts to existing applications, which will automatically adapt to run on a watch, a phone, an iPad, and a Mac, and a TV as required, depending on where they want their application to run, without them having to do an awful lot of work. So, but I've been spending the last few weeks since the developers conference trying to catch up on podcasts and things from various sources, and some of them are saying, well, these are like one-man band developers who are saying, given the amount of stuff Apple's released, I don't think I'm actually going to get onto most of this new stuff for about a year anyway. So, or months and months. So it seems quite likely that there won't be a massive sudden glut of new applications coming out in September that everybody's going to have to rush out and get the new operating system just so they can run all the stuff. But I'm expecting that over time there will be a rapid increase in new software which makes use of these new things that Apple's introducing, which only runs on the new operating systems. So there's going to be a growing pool of software which runs across many of Apple's platforms, which is going to expect that people are going to be keeping up to date on their operating system versions. So that sort of counterbalances against the pressure of I've got old software which I want to keep using, and it will all stop working suddenly in the next operating system. Hence, I wanted on the meeting next month to address that, to give people the option of not getting stuck and missing out on an awful lot of what will probably be an awful lot of new stuff that will become available over the next year or two. So, I won't go over the new features quite yet. I just wanted to go over the compatibility stuff first of all. I've updated my model support chart, which most people here probably have seen in an earlier iteration several months ago. I did this a while back, but I've been tracking how long Apple supports each Mac model in terms of when, from the point it's introduced, how long they sell it for, which is the blue part of the bars, how long they then support it in, fully support it in future operating system, which is the green part of the bars, and the ones that they haven't stopped selling yet, I've stuck an orange bar of arbitrary length on the end to indicate that the end of this bar is not yet known. So the orange bars are not an accurate representation of when I think they will be supported, but they are hopeful, shall we say. And the,
5 years.
yeah, so if you look at, if you're looking at these and if you ignore the first 3 years, because those were pretty bad in terms of Macs, because the 2006 and 2007 ones got dropped pretty quickly, but if you started around about 2009 for the Mac Mini or 2007 for the iMac, you'll notice that they're mostly peaking around about the 8 to 9 year mark, all the green bars. So we've had one iMac, the mid-2007, which reached 9 years of software support from the point it was introduced. Then they go back and back and back and back, then they jump up again. The reason for that shape is that Apple does cut-offs every few years. So the 2007, early 2008, early 2009 and mid-2009 iMacs could all run El Capitan, but not Sierra. So these models are all the ones that are able to run El Capitan, and of course the oldest one of that group is the one that was supported the longest. So similarly, the next group can run Sierra and High Sierra, but not Mojave. So that's again jumping up to nearly 9 years and then sagging back to about 7 years. So the pattern that seems to be developing over the last few years is that Apple tends to be supporting most Mac models for at least 7 years after the model is introduced. Sometimes a little bit less, like that late 2009 Mac Mini, of which I own 2, got not quite 7 years. I was a bit irritated by that one. That was the old one out. It was the only late 2009 model that couldn't run Sierra, or later. So far, the 2012 models are able to upgrade to Catalina, the next operating system, which means that, assuming that is the last version they can run, the late 2012 Mac Mini and iMac will get nearly 8 years. But if Apple doesn't drop those models next year, then they'll get back up to 9 years again, so, and possibly a bit beyond that. So what I don't know yet is what Apple's next decision is going to be on when they start dropping support for old models. So you can see generally the pattern that's forming here. If you look at Mac Pros, we now have 2 more data points because Catalina will not run on a 2010 or 2012 Mac Pro. So the 2010 one also got up to 9 years, 2012 one only got up to just over 7 years. 2013 is already up to nearly 9 years because it's going to run Catalina. So that's going to help. The original MacBook also got up to nearly 9 years. The MacBook Air, the last model that wasn't supported, it got just over 7 years. The oldest currently supported model is already over 8 years. MacBooks, the new ones, are over 6 years and haven't finished yet. So that's the new style 12-inch MacBook with the single USB-C port on the side. MacBook Pros, again ignoring the first couple of years, the first year or so, from 2007, that's actually the winner so far. The mid-2007 MacBook Pro got 9 years and 1 month longer than the iMac, I think. Or might be 2 months longer, I can't quite remember. August and June, I think it was, so yeah, that might be 2 months. So again, they follow the same pattern of sagging back and then stepping forward. So far, the oldest supported MacBook Pro, which is the mid-2012 one, has got over 8 years, well, by the time Catalina finishes, I think. So that's getting close to the point now that if you have a 2012 Mac, the likelihood of it being supported more than 1 more year is looking pretty slim because Apple seems to only support things for up to 9 years. So if you do have a 2012 model, you might be needing to think about buying a new one in the next few years from now. It's important to also think about the detail though that when the end mark is reached here, that's just the latest operating system, because on Macs, Apple does 2 more years of security updates for the last 2 operating systems. So you can actually stretch it 2 more years beyond that. So if you're lucky and you happen to get a model that was the oldest supported one for a particular operating system, you can get up to 11 years of software updates from the point you buy the computer if you bought it when it was just introduced. So that's the best case we've had so far. It was just over 11 years. So right now, for example, I've got a late 2013 model. I'm a year ahead of the cutoff point. I'm hoping that Apple's going to introduce a computer I'm more inclined to buy than the current MacBook Pros before this one stops being supported. So I'm going to hold on for another year and see what happens next year. I'm not in a hurry to replace this one since it still works fine. But if I had a 2012 one, I'd be looking much more seriously at potentially needing to buy a 2019 or 20 model in the near future, because I don't want to be left too far behind, because I need to run the latest operating system for support reasons and various things. So, but for everybody else, if you are not in an urgent hurry to run the latest operating system, my usual advice for Mac users is you should be running either the very latest version, the one before that, or the two before that. So right now that would mean running Mojave 10.14, High Sierra 10.13, or Sierra 10.12. Those are the three versions that are still getting security updates and Safari updates, so they're still reasonably well supported. However, come September, when Catalina is introduced, Apple will stop supporting macOS 10.12 Sierra. So if you are still on Sierra now, there is one more round of expected software updates before September, which is going to include macOS 10.14.6 and corresponding security updates. After that one, there is probably going to be no further software updates for Sierra except iTunes related stuff for another year or so. So that means if you want to keep getting security updates and you're still running Sierra, you should be planning to upgrade to at least High Sierra in the not too distant future. And since Apple hasn't made it hard to get High Sierra, it appears that there's no time pressure on that particularly. If you're still running anything older than Sierra, you're already into the I haven't had security updates for most of a year or worse. So anybody on El Capitan, for example, it's not too bad yet, but if you go back another version, Yosemite, it's starting to get worse. So you go back two versions, however you count it, Mavericks 10.9, you can't run Google Chrome anymore because Google Chrome now requires Yosemite. Firefox does still support 10.9, but it's probably not got long to go. You go back to Mountain Lion 10.8, there are no supported web browsers, full stop. So you're running out-of-date software already, and I know people who've been running Snow Leopard through Mountain Lion who found that a substantially increasing number of websites they try to use just don't work anymore because they refuse to talk to such old web browsers or they're not tested on them. So you rapidly run out of support if you get more than around about 3 or 4 versions behind the bottom end of Apple's support window. So you shouldn't be going that far back, but there is sort of a grey area in the middle where, as long as you don't mind the risk of the security updates, you can sort of hold on for a bit longer. That's sort of the pattern I'm seeing. So basically right now I'm recommending that anybody running El Capitan or earlier should be trying to find a way to upgrade to a later operating system, except possibly on an old Mac that they want to not bother using on the internet. It's fine for stuff you're just going to run locally. It's only the internet related stuff where it gets to be a problem. But if you're running Sierra, you should be planning to upgrade to something later. High Sierra is a relatively minor upgrade from Sierra. Mojave, if you're running older 32-bit software, is a nuisance because it keeps bugging you every month about the fact you're running old software. High Sierra does that once, and Mojave does it monthly. So that's a nuisance. And obviously the next version, Catalina, is going to drop support for a large chunk of old software. But as I said, I'm going to cover that in more detail next month. Okay, anybody have any questions on that sort of general pattern of advice?
There's no problem with updating to Mojave because we keep getting reminded.
No, it's fine. As far as stability goes, I've been running Mojave since this first minor update, and in the early versions, the only problem I really ran into was that the old version of Pages didn't work, and I've discovered recently it started working again, so they must have fixed it by now. Well, they fixed the operating system to support it. So there's one more update to come. So if you've got probably next month it'll get released based on previous timing. So if you wait until that version, it means you won't have any very, very large software updates to install after that's released. So I'll mention that when the time comes as a reminder point. But if you want to upgrade now, there's not really any major reason to hold back, unless you've got an application which doesn't work, and there are a few of those, but not very many. Margaret?
Yes, apart from the monthly reminders, is there any difference in the ones remaining 32-bit
In theory, yes, because if there is no 32-bit software running on the computer, the operating system doesn't need to load any 32-bit support software, which means there's more memory available for everything else. So there'll be a slight performance penalty for running any 32-bit software on the computer.
Right, I actually meant, like even in high Sierra, the 32-bit stuff may not work as well as it used to for you.
No. Basically, Apple said that High Sierra was the last version that would fully support 32-bit software, and well, without compromise is the term they used. So Mojave adds compromises. So I think that means that they've re-emphasised some things internally, so it's more geared to running 64-bit, and it's a bit more complicated for it to run 32-bit software. Plus, it bugs you every month. That seems to be about the limit of what they meant by that.
Is it
Just the bugging every month, or does that software work?
It works. I mean, most apart from, as I said, the old version of Pages stopped working in Mojave, was still working in High Sierra, so that's why I completely switched over to the new version.
I'm not worried about things that are easy to replace.
It's like Pages with new versions.
But there are probably more obscure things that stopped working as of any particular version. I've had things that are broken in every OS version, so there's nothing in particularly different about Mojave or High Sierra in that respect. Yeah, so it's mainly the nagging. There will be a few specific applications that don't work properly, but that's just it always happens with every operating system. Something stops working. But most of my 32-bit software is still working fine. I'm now preemptively getting rid of it, most of it though, to avoid problems with the next version after this version, which it won't work. So if there's no further Mac-related questions, I'll just go on to the iPad and iPhone corresponding timelines. For the iPhone, unfortunately, Apple's gone and broken my nice pattern. It was building up quite happily, so that there were iPhones were supported for 4 years, then they were supported for 5 years, then they were starting to be supported for 6 years, but they've broken it with the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, which don't get 6 years of support, they only get 5 years of support. So now I'm in this grey area, I'm not sure what the future pattern is going to be again. So the 5S is the winner so far at 6 years of software support, and unless Apple changes their pattern, which they have yet to do, on iOS devices, they don't do security updates anymore for the previous version. So once a device stops running the latest iOS, it's stuck on whatever version it's got, and it's extremely rare. There's been like 3 updates ever for iOS devices after the next version came out. A couple of them for iPhone 3GS and iPod Touch, 3rd generation, I think it was. It might be fourth generation, and one for about the iPhone 3G, I think, or something like that, or the original. I can't remember what it was now. Right back in the early days, there was one late software update for something. So basically, we're looking at probably 5 years for all iPhones going forward. Some will get 6 years, and I'm projecting 6 years for the 6 Plus and onwards, just because I think the reason that Apple dropped support for the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus is they don't have as much memory as every other iPhone that's able to run 10.13. Even though they've got the same processor as the iPads that can run 10.13, they've got half the RAM. So I think that's the reason that Apple dropped those particular models, the 6 and 6 Plus, simply don't have enough RAM. Everything after that line, after that point there, has got 2 gigabytes of RAM or better. Everything above that line has 1 gigabyte of RAM or less. So I think that's all that's going on there. We'll have to wait a year and find out, but I'm hoping that the iPhone 6S, 6S Plus and SE the SE gets half a year less because it was introduced later, but I'm hopeful that they'll all get 6 years again. For iPads, the original iPad was a complete disaster in terms of software support because it had so little memory and it couldn't run even iOS 6, so it got abandoned. The iPad 2 was the previous victor on 5.5 years, but now the iPad Air has beaten it. So the iPad Air, which I happen to have one of here, got nearly 6 years of software support. So the pattern, if you combine iPhones and iPads, 6 years appears to be about the limit Apple's sticking to at the moment for software support. So the iPad Air has got 6 years. The iPad Air 2 will have 6 years by the time the next iOS version's finished. I don't imagine it will go beyond that. I just marked it as a possibility. Everything beyond that we don't know, it depends on the future patterns, so it's harder to tell. iPad minis, best one, the Mini 2 got nearly 6 years, the Mini 3 was worse, the Mini 4 is on its last version probably. The iPad Pro hasn't reached the point yet where it's at risk of being dropped because it's got one processor version newer than the lowest supported models of iPad. iPod Touches generally are bad. They've got 4 years, almost all on the last few versions, and as I currently own 2 iPod Touch 5s and 3 iPod Touch 6s, I've been annoyed again by the fact. And what's even more annoying, see that very, very short green bit there? They stopped selling the iPod Touch, and then the next week they announced it wasn't going to run the next operating system. So that's only like 3 months, 4 months-ish advance notice. So people who bought one of the latest iPod Touch models in May would have only got 4 more months of software updates on it. And that's it. That's the shortest ever for any iOS device, which is irritating. The previous loser in that respect was the second generation iPod Touch, which got 6 months. So Apple doesn't seem to care much about iPod Touches, unfortunately. Apple TVs, however, going strong. The third generation Apple TV's just got another software update to support the new TV Plus service when that comes out, so the new Apple TV apps on it, which means it's already up to 7 years of software updates and counting. So it appears that Apple's emphasising the Apple TVs aren't really geared to running high performance software, so there's less need, I think, for them to drop support for them as quickly, whereas iPhones and iPads, they have to eventually drop all the old processors, so all the app developers don't have to keep supporting all the really, really old and slow models. So, and that means they're limited in what features they can add if they have to support everything. So, but I am getting the impression, particularly with the last version, that where possible, Apple is extending the support window within reason. So we're not sort of getting things being abandoned arbitrarily. There are reasons in each case when it's happened. Okay. Anybody have any questions about any of the iPhone, iPad support stuff? So just to specify exactly which models we're talking about, the ones that cannot upgrade to the next operating system, which is iOS 13, are the iPhone 5S, the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, the iPad Air, iPad Mini 2 and Mini 3, but not the Mini 4 and the Air 2 are okay. They're the oldest supported models. And the 6th generation iPod Touch. So those ones, if you've still got one of those models, the main annoyance is if you had an iPad 5S and you wanted another similarly small model, Apple doesn't sell the SE anymore, so that would be the next natural upgrade. So you're sort of stuck if you wanted another physically small iPhone. What did you end up doing, Peter? You've got an SE, haven't you? So you've got another year to go before making that decision, hopefully, or maybe 2 if you're lucky. Yeah. Okay. So that's, unless there's any questions on that, that's basically all I wanted to say on the model support side of things. So if I just hop over to Apple's support page, not that one, let's find that one. There we go. So we can just have a quick glance at the major functionality and if there's any questions that people have got about those sorts of things. So they're sticking with the California names. Catalina is, I think, a beach resort mostly. I think I'm aware of it as being in California. It's an island as well, but it must be an island off a small rock. Yeah, okay, right. So, what have they done here? Now, so the first thing which I got I was actually shouting at my television because all of the mainstream news media heard Apple is breaking up iTunes and took this to mean that they're shutting down all the services, which is not true at all. So if you happen to see any of the news broadcasts on the day of Apple's keynote, they were all going and being all cocky about the fact that music sales are dead and streaming music is the victor, and none of that is true because Apple's not shutting down the iTunes store. What they're going to do in the next version of macOS is they're breaking up the iTunes application on the Mac. So what this means is, at the moment, if you have a look at iTunes on the Mac, it's got this pop-up menu here which lets you choose different major functional sections of iTunes. So you can look at your music, your movies, your TV shows, your podcasts, your audiobooks, and whatever other stuff you've got turned on there. I think there may be other ones there. They got rid of apps at some point. Apps was one of the things that iTunes did. That was in iTunes 12.7. They removed that feature. But what effectively they're doing is that they're taking the existing iTunes application as it stands right now. Its music features are being taken out and put into a new application called Music, and all the other parts are being pushed somewhere else. So the application called Music in macOS Catalina is actually iTunes renamed with only the music features. So everything that you currently find under Music in iTunes appears to be present in the Music application in macOS Catalina. So it's not a copy of the iOS Music app, which is less fully featured, ported up to the Mac. It's actually the iTunes application with all the smart playlist features and everything else like that. So people like me who've been using iTunes since the day it was released practically, who have a very large music collection, do not be worried. Your music collection will still work fine. It'll just get converted across to the new application if you upgrade to Catalina. And that also extends to the iTunes Store, the music online store. If you've bought stuff from that or you want to buy stuff from that, it will still be there. If you do subscribe to Apple Music, which is Apple's subscription paid by the month, get access to the entire collection thing, that will also be there and it will be emphasised more, but you can ignore it. You can just switch to using your own music library and be back where you were. If you have not yet imported all your CD collection or LPs converted to digital music or whatever it might be, it will still support capturing audio from CDs. So all of that functionality is still there. There is nothing lost as far as we can tell from what we've seen so far. The user interface is going to change a bit, not enormously. They had a screenshot of it here. Which one was it? Music. Oh, I have to wait for the picture to load now. It's not loading.
So where would you go to do a backup of your iPhone through iTunes?
That's one thing that is changing. So basically all the music stuff is staying in the music application. So for some reason this page has decided not to load any of the images. I'll just see if I can get them to load. Thank you. Right. So that's what the new music application looks like. So you can see it's got a sidebar down the left-hand side with playlists, library, Apple Music as a separate section, a search field at the top. It's got a little play bar along the top. It's currently showing some stuff from Apple Music, so we don't have a screenshot of the rest of it. But from people who have reported on the early betas, it's basically iTunes, and if it even is, they can tell it is actually a copy of the iTunes application with tweaks. It's not actually a rewrite or anything like that. So nothing to worry about. So the other parts of iTunes, which are not going to be in the same application, the obvious ones are movies and TV shows, which are moving into the new Apple TV app. TV shows is a bit of a dead duck in New Zealand because Apple's never done any TV shows here. However, that's probably going to change in September when they release their Apple TV Plus service, which will be available in many countries. So that will be probably subscription, but they haven't said the details about that yet. And that will give you access to a bunch of new TV programs that Apple's publishing. And they've got a wide range of stuff. I didn't even bother watching the keynote which announced all of it. In fact, I realised I hadn't even downloaded the podcast, the keynote video for it, so I did that. So I've got a copy of it in case I want to look at it. But so those that may be the only TV content. But if you use the movies feature at all, that will be in the same app. So the TV app will take care of all of that. If you have an iPhone or an iPad, it's already got the TV app and it's already moved the movies into that, replacing the old video app for us. So that stuff, and that one was one I haven't seen a detailed report on yet, but Podcasts is also moving into a separate application called Podcasts. And that one's quite interesting because that's the music app. There's the TV app, which is obviously highlighting video, and it's a bit like the Apple TV user interface as far as I can see. It's got sort of like big blocks to choose programs and that sort of thing. But here is the Podcasts app, which looks suspiciously like the iTunes music app. It turns out that this application, however, is a port of the iOS version of Podcasts now running on the Mac. And despite that, they've made a very good job of making it look just like Music, which is a Mac application written natively. So that instills a great deal of confidence in me in terms of how these apps that are migrating to the Mac can appear. If you've encountered any of the ones that Apple did in 10.14, which is things like voice memos, this is actually this is an early cut of the same mechanism where an iPad version of the application has been ported to the Mac, running under what in Mojave is a private Apple facility, but they're opening it up to all developers in Catalina. So this one is a slightly weird Mac application. It's got a single window, you can't open multiple documents, doesn't have most of the usual sort of commands in its menus. This was worrying a lot of people because they thought this is what all the ported applications might end up looking like. That fear has been allayed by seeing what the podcast application in particular is going to be like. So Apple's done an awful lot of work in the last year making the porting frameworks for iOS applications to Mac a lot more fully featured, and they're expecting developers to actually do extra work required to make it behave like a normal Mac application, which is a good thing. So podcasts is all done separately. Peter's question regarding how do you sync your iPhone, all of the iOS device support, including syncing, restoring it, doing software updates, that sort of thing, is moving to Finder. So when you plug your iPhone or iPad into your Mac via a USB cable, or you're using the Wi-Fi syncing method, it will appear in the sidebar of your Finder window like you plugged in an external drive, which is perfectly logical because that's how all your external drives currently appear. So there'll be another thing along the side here with an iPhone or whatever it might be. And if you click on that, you'll get a screen which looks suspiciously like the screen out of iTunes previously, which lets you manage the device. So it's got all the settings there for doing software updates and that sort of thing. So all of that functionality will still be there, it's just going to be in Finder rather than in iTunes. And Apple's already been moving in this direction because they've already separated out the iOS version specific support code out of the iTunes application in Mojave. There's already a separate component which they've moved back to the previous two versions as well. So they've been preparing for this for quite a while. There's lots of sort of little subtle clues about that. So in effect, I don't expect any features of iTunes are going to disappear. It'll just be organised differently. Audio books are moving into iBooks. They'll be part of the books. Sorry, now called Books, just the Books application. So that makes sense. The audio books and reading books will all be in one place. So I haven't actually seen it myself yet, so I can't comment on specific details. And even if I had seen it, I couldn't comment on specific details. So, but that's just from what I've been reading, hearing other people's commentary on it, and looking at the pictures online, that sort of thing. So that's basically no problems there. If you are concerned about iTunes, don't be. Basically, is the summary. Any questions on that general area? But we've sort of covered, I think, the major point, which is how do you deal with your iOS devices. So I don't expect to lose any features. Basically, it'll just be organised differently and take a little bit of head twisting to get around the new concepts.
So do we just rely on it to know what's in the track?
I mean, it can tell which are podcasts and...
Well, they're already organised. They're already subdivided in the iTunes library according to types of. I don't know how it organises the data differently. But if you go and have a look currently in the music folder and then in the iTunes folder, there is a folder called iTunes Music, and inside that it's got a folder for audio books, a folder for podcasts, and probably music is. And there's a few things I've got there separated out for some reason, but I've still got some. I don't know why some of these are in separate folders. I don't know where these have come from, but for some reason some of my folders have ended up outside the music subfolder. But not sure why. That might be ones that I've put there to try and organise them or something like that.
So if you're syncing through Finder,
yeah,
and you want to sync music,
you just do it through Finder. The management of what gets synced might be done inside the individual applications. I'm not entirely clear on that.
To go back and tick and tick.
Yeah, not sure exactly how that's going to tie in, but that's currently the user interface that is under the device, not under iTunes. Yeah. So, for example, I expect that Finder would give you a music sync option and would then let you pick from your music playlists and that sort of thing. So I'm expecting all of that stuff will just be in Finder, and it'll be organised into multiple panes or whatever it needs to be for that.
What was the path into that, David?
Under your home folder, you go into music. And then you go into, it's variously named, but iTunes and then it might be iTunes Music, or I can't remember. There were two different names that Apple have used, so it just sticks with whichever one. Yeah, but under there, the files I have got some audio books I've managed to acquire. I bought Dirk Gently and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy at some point. I don't think I've listened to them yet, but yeah, podcasts. I've got quite a few of those. There's all of the Apple keynotes taking up a rather significant chunk of space on my computer, so I'm going to offload some of them because I'm probably not going to watch them very often. But all of that, I think what will end up happening is that it will reorganise the folders so that you'll probably find that the podcasts move to a different folder rather than being under an iTunes folder, and the movies may move into a different folder completely and things like that. So that there'll be some restructuring, but it should end up not losing anything. If you're at all worried about it, just to make sure you've got a full backup before you upgrade, as usual. So I always do that anyway. Yeah.
He's got it not very well organised in this podcasts and
Yep.
radio.
There's a podcast symbol on the bottom row, right in the middle of the purple one.
Yeah, that's what the icon looks like. It's the same icon as on the iOS devices. So that's the yep. If you're at all worried about the somewhat cluttered iTunes thing, what you can do before you upgrade is there's actually under the library menu, under the file menu, there's a consolidate files command in iTunes. What that does is if you've somehow managed to get a collection of files where some things you've added which are not stored inside your library, when you consolidate it, copies all the files into your iTunes library folder and organises them all correctly. So that will make sure they're all in the right place before you do the upgrade. So that might be worth doing. Again, do a backup first before you do anything major like that. Yeah. Okay. So other stuff that they've mentioned, the favourite iPad apps coming to the Mac, and there's a few of them they talked about, like car racing games and things like that. So third-party apps coming to the Mac. So they're doing those ones. Yeah, they got Photos. Yeah, so Photos has got. I only watched this part of the keynote once, so I haven't really absorbed all the details of it. But they seem to be doing things like, if you've ended up taking a lot of very similar photos, say a whole burst of photos, and they've ended up in your library, it will try to hide all the ones that look like they're about the same photo and only show you one of them, things like that. Highlight photos that it thinks are interesting. So, for example, it's picked this good portrait photo of somebody rather than a less interesting one as a sort of a highlighting aid. There are still ways of looking at your entire library, but it's normal. Basically, the assumption is its normal presentation is going to be more looking like a photo album than a big long blob of lots of little photos. Is sort of the impression I've got. They've also got new organisational tools for organising things into years and months and days rather than the somewhat arbitrary moments and collections which nobody seems to understand, which is better. And there seemed to be something which I wasn't entirely clear on, which was talking about if you are on a date which is a significant one and you've taken lots of photos like a child's birthday, it will give you presentations showing you past years of the same event or something like that. So it's got some automatic tools of that sort of nature built into it. So it sounded interesting. Hopefully you can bypass all that and just say, I want to look at my photo library things. Don't show me all this curated stuff. The Notes application, and this one, so that Photos one, by the way, that applies to all platforms. So iOS and the Mac both get that level of functionality again. And Notes, I believe you can already organise your notes into folders, but they're now going to let you reorganise the folders more easily. So, and also share folders with people. So if you're using Notes as a collaboration tool, you can create a folder, share that folder with somebody else, and all the notes that are added to that folder or edited in that folder automatically share with everybody who's got that folder, which is a convenient way of doing lots of little snippets of things. And you can also have a two-level hierarchy, apparently, of notes folders. So that looks like it's going to be better, because my notes list is, I haven't bothered creating folders, but it's it's got quite a long chunk of everything sorted by the most recent one at the top. So I usually just use the search tool to find something I know I've got a note on. So that'd be good to be able to organise that better. One thing I should point out is is anybody here likely to want to try a public beta or develop a beta version of the new operating system before it's released? Because one thing I've been hearing repeated warnings from all the developers who've tried this is, do not try this unless you have to, because they're having to write new software to take advantage of it, so they're having to explore it. And if you do, don't do it on your main device, because it does all sorts of nasty things, like, for example, Notes restructures all of your notes, Reminders restructures all your reminders, and they're no longer compatible with your older devices. So if you have a mixture of devices, you can't sync anything anymore unless they're all running the beta software. So basically, let's just wait, shall we? I'm going to run it on a spare device not linked to my main account, so I can never play with it, but I'm not going to do it with my main devices. Reminders has got a substantial rewrite. I haven't absorbed the details on that one, so it looks like a lot more organisational tools, smart tools, so you can type in a reminder saying remind me to do something at 3 p.m. It'll actually automatically fill in the time fields for you and recognise them, that sort of stuff. Smart lists for upcoming reminders, everything like that. Now, Safari's got a new start page. Whoop-de-doo, I never used the previous ones. Yep. Now this one looks interesting. Extending your desktop with an iPad. This is the whole reason I bought my big screen iPad, so I could use it as a separate monitor for my Mac, which I have done about 3 times with third-party software. There's going to be a built-in feature of Catalina, and initial reports are a bit mixed, because there have been people who've used the first beta who said that it only works if you have a 2016 or later Mac with a recent enough processor. However, there appeared to be a switch you could turn on using a hidden command, using the command line, to enable it for older models as well, but whether that's going to make it to the final version is unclear. Apple have not said anything about that particular feature and whether it's going to work on older models. So at the moment I may be looking at, oh yes, I'd like to use that feature, but oh, my computer's too old. I don't know yet. But there are, as I mentioned in my article, at least 2 third-party solutions, if not 3 or 4, to do something similar if you actually want to use an iPad as an external screen for a Mac. It's the sort of thing I occasionally want to do if I'm at home. I've actually got an external monitor I can plug in, but if I'm not at home and I want an extra screen for doing something like showing something else I'm looking at while I'm working on a document, it's quite handy having that sort of capability there if I need it. And the idea of this is that you can basically just have a Wi-Fi connection or a cable connection to your iPad, and it acts like an external monitor. And if it's a new enough iPad that supports an Apple Pencil, you can actually use the pencil on the iPad screen in drawing software on the Mac that supports a drawing tablet only to actually use the iPad screen as a tablet. So it isn't a general purpose input device, and you can't use the touch screen on the iPad to act like a touch screen for the Mac. It's only a display device really, or a drawing aid. But having it built in as a standard feature is good, because all the third-party solutions are a little bit flaky because they have to keep hacking their way into what Apple's changed and that sort of stuff. So it's good to have an official way of doing that. So they're talking about Apple Pencil support there for using with that feature. That's again using the Apple Pencil on the iPad, not on the Mac. Yep. Those are examples of applications that are compatible with the Pencil support. So if you have Affinity Photo or Illustrator or something like that. Screen time. This is a feature which was introduced last year on iOS, which I have been bemused by rather than actually done anything with, but some people might find it. What it tends to do is it sends me a reminder every week telling me my screen time is up by 200% or down by 50%, or it might be just because I've used my iPad varying amounts of time. But it could potentially be useful if you have a family member, particularly a young one, who is in the habit of getting addicted to playing things, and should be spending less time on their device. You can set up your Mac or your iPad or your iPhone to limit times, report on what it's been used for, or even just to analyse what you've been using your computer for, if you don't actually use it to limit yourself in any way. So it might be statistically, just out of curiosity reasons or whatever it might be, you might want to try that. But you can find out, oh my goodness, I didn't realise I was using Facebook that much, or something like that, which some people might find a problem with. Communication limits is one feature of that, so that lets you control things like children's ability to be contacted by random strangers on the internet, which could be quite handy, but most people wouldn't do that themselves. A lot of that sort of features of that, of sub-features of that, I'm not particularly interested. Security features, they're talking about, one of them, for example, is that the actual core operating system is already protected by a feature called System Integrity Protection, which prevents most software on the Mac from modifying files in the operating system. They're going to go one step further by having the entire operating system mounted as a separate read-only volume, so nothing on the computer can modify it anyway, even if there was a bug in the security protection stuff. So that's even further protection. Plus they're going to add more things that require user permission to access. Your documents and desktop folders, iCloud Drive and external volumes will require, any application that's going to access them will require your permission, which is already a large chunk of new features in that area in Mojave. They're going to add even more of them in Catalina. So that requires, basically the first time the application tries to access that, you'll get a pop-up message from your computer saying you have to go into system preferences and go into the right subsection and enable this application or something like that. Most applications are actually guiding you through that process. They're saying, in order for this feature to work, I need you to do the following, and they tell you where to go to find it. But sometimes that's you have to go and find it yourself because the application hasn't been updated to know that it needs to do that. What was activation lock? If you do have one of these new Macs that's got the T2 chip, you may be familiar with activation lock if you have an iPhone or iPad. If you've signed into iCloud on your iPhone or iPad and it gets stolen, and even if it gets wiped, it's still locked to your Apple ID. So it's impossible for the new person to actually activate it unless they know your Apple ID and your password. So it's at least a data protection measure, or they guess your Apple ID and password admittedly, but two-factor authentication will help with that. That feature is going to come to the Mac with Catalina, but it only works on latest models that have got that T2 chip, because that's the one that actually implements the feature. So that means a 2018 or later MacBook Pro, MacBook Air, Mac Mini, an iMac Pro, or a 2019 Mac Pro, but not an iMac yet, because the iMacs haven't got that chip. This one looks very interesting, particularly the features that Apple hasn't announced yet, but developers have been finding out about. So you may be aware of Find My iPhone, which is basically you can track your phone from any of your other devices, or from iCloud. So if your phone gets lost, you can find it via a map, as long as it's got cell phone coverage or it's on a Wi-Fi network or something like that. So if you drop it somewhere, hopefully you can track it down, or somebody steals it, you can see where they are, that sort of thing. There is also the Find My Friends application, which you can opt into to say, I want to allow a certain person to track me, and then you can find each other on a map, which I find quite handy. Shane and I have got each other on there, for example, which is great for coordinating, getting together for maybe meetings or whatever. And I've got my whole family are on it, so we can all find each other in a hurry if we need to. Those applications will be combining into a single application called Find My in the next operating systems. So Find My, Friend, iPhone, iPad, Mac, whatever it might be. What Apple have not announced yet, but developers are saying seems to be a feature, is Apple appears to also be going to introduce a little tag device, probably in September, which can be attached to whatever you like and can be used to be found with the Find My app as well. If you've come across tile tags, it seems to be the same thing, and I'm wondering what the story is with patents and things, unless Apple's either going to buy tile or license it from them, because it sounds pretty much the same thing. But the idea is, and the other very neat feature of this is the new feature they're adding for all the variations on this, that it will even find your device if it's offline and sleeping, because they're adding basically a global data collection network so that everybody who is running a new operating system with an iPhone, an iPad or a Mac will automatically detect any Apple devices nearby in Bluetooth range and report to Apple if they need to be found. So Apple will have this massive data collection from all Apple users, providing ways of finding your lost device if it just happens to be near anybody else's Apple device, not just your own ones. So the neat trick though is it's all thoroughly encrypted, so even Apple doesn't know whose device it is or where it is. It's all encrypted using your own devices. The data has to get to your device before it can your other device. You've got to have at least two devices to use this feature. So one device gets lost, you can use the other one to find it. Is the idea. And if, for example, your phone got stolen and the person who stole it happens to have another iPhone on them, their iPhone will reveal where your stolen iPhone is. Even if they switch your iPhone into airplane mode, it will still know where it is. They turn it off, of course, but then its last known location will hopefully be known, so there may be a hint at least. But I like this concept. The only catch is you have to own at least 2 Apple devices running the latest operating system to activate it. So if you only have one device, you may miss out. And it's also not clear to me whether the 2 device requirement also extends to the new implementation of the normal Find My iPhone or Find My Friends, because that suggests that they may still support the old method as well. So I like that concept. It seems poetic justice for the person who is stealing your device to try and tell you where they are.
What would happen in terms of thefts?
Sorry, what was that?
In other words, if someone stole something and tried to on-sell it,
Yeah.
to get cash, right?
Yeah.
Then if some other person sold another Apple device to them, they would talk to each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't seen the full details yet, but I'm assuming this applies even if the device has been wiped and is in the screen needing activation lock. It would still be doing its Bluetooth communication with any other nearby Apple device to announce its location. So it should be retained even over being deactivated or erased. So just being turned on again is sufficient to make it announce its presence. So yeah, anybody stealing a bunch of Apple devices is going to be at risk, because any one of them will be telling everything else where everything is. Yes, snitching. As I said, I like the concept. It's very clever.
The devices will snitch.
Yeah. And if you're concerned about power consumption and so forth, it's only going to use Bluetooth low energy, and it's not doing it constantly, it's only doing it occasionally, it's not going to use a lot of power, so it's not going to drain the battery significantly, and it's also not going to use much data, so your devices announcing the presence of other nearby Apple devices isn't going to use up a lot more of its data. It'll use a little bit, admittedly, but and I think it's going to be smart enough. I hope Apple will design it in such a way, I don't know how, but given all the security requirements, but they hopefully be smart enough that it won't be doing this all the time. Oh yes, there's a device. Oh yes, there's the same device. Oh yes, it shouldn't need to do that, because it's already announced it and it hasn't moved, so there's no reason to do it again. Anybody who has an Apple Watch, Rex and I, may already have encountered this one. If you have a recent enough Mac, you can unlock the computer using just by being close enough to it with your watch, or on and unlocked. So they're getting added more variants of that, so revealing passwords in Safari and a few things like that. What was that, sorry?
Keyless entry.
Keyless entry, effectively, yes. It's very clever because it actually measures the time required for the signal to travel to and from the Mac. And if I need to be about that far away, and I'm too far away from it to activate it, it's very sensitive. I quite like that feature. The catch is, I have an original Apple Watch which can't run the new operating system, so if this feature requires new stuff, I'm going to have to buy a new watch this year. I've managed to get away with it without upgrading it for 1 year, but I may not survive 2 years. So, now, does anybody here deal with anybody who is, say, paraplegic or otherwise disabled to the point they can't move their arms in particular? This feature, if you haven't seen the keynote demonstration of this, it's definitely worth looking at that bit. This looks quite compelling for anybody who needs to operate their computer. They can't physically move enough to control switches and things like that, because it was able to do things like actually talking to the computer and saying show tags, and it showed a numbered tag for all the points on the screen that were controllable, and then you say the number and it activates whatever that was, so then button number 15, whatever it might be. Looking at a map, you can draw a grid on the screen and say zoom on grid position, whatever it might be, and then staying there and then panning around or something. It was the degree of control was phenomenal just with the voice control. And I thought that looked like it was the guy who actually designed it is in fact the guy in the photo there. He is a quadriplegic, so that looks very interesting. And again, that's a feature which is only available in the new operating systems, and that's one which is on the iPhone, the iPad, and the Mac. So again, that's looking quite interesting. Even if you are not disabled to that degree, it could be quite handy at times if you're busy, your hands are busy doing something else. You want to actually get your Mac to look at something. You can turn on voice control and zoom in on part of the map, not having to actually reach for your mouse and like if you're busy doing something else at the same time. If you're trying to manipulate another computer or device or whatever. Yeah, or cooking. Yeah, tell your iPad to zoom in on part of the map you can't, the recipe you can't read. There's an example. I'm intrigued, shall we say. The possibilities are quite interesting. And one other accessibility thing that wasn't mentioned by Apple, which is quite interesting, is they're adding mouse support on iOS, on iPads in particular. I'm not sure about iPhones. And on the concept of being able to use a mouse or trackpad if you turn on accessibility, it's not a normal feature, it's an accessibility feature, where you have a simulated finger point on the screen. There's like a little circle that you can then move around using a trackpad or mouse and then click to simulate a touch. So that could be quite handy for if you're using an external keyboard and you don't want to keep reaching up and touching things on the screen, or for people who have difficulty actually operating a touch screen again, but they can operate a mouse or a trackpad or an equivalent. So there's an example of a grid sort of feature showing grid numbers, and they can zoom in on a particular grid position and that sort of thing. Hover text is another thing for people who've got bad eyesight. They can zoom up a chunk of text, and if you have a selection that can actually make it bigger and easier to read. There is a page here of show the full list of what's new, but I won't go through it because it will take forever. Right, so new feature-wise, it looks like there are quite a few nice new features there without changing too much. The big caveat, of course, is throwing out all the very old software that doesn't run anymore, which Apple doesn't, of course, mention on their website. Let me just hop over to the iPad one. So if I just quickly zip through the iPad one for comparison, now iPad has now got its own operating system separately named. It's iPad OS rather than just iOS, but really that's just emphasising the point that there are now a significant number of differences between the iPhone and iPad. They're really the same operating system under the hood, it just there's certain parts of the user interface differ. So iPad OS, what's in a name? So they're adding, and again it's not loading the images. Why is it not loading the images? Do I have to use my phone? Here we go. So they've improved the slide over feature if you've ever used that on an iPad, which was basically you had this whopping great huge long vertical scrolling list and it was impossible to find anything. You can now have a list of your favourite items easily accessible in the slide overview, which makes it easier to find the things you actually want to put there. The major thing though is if you're wanting to use your iPad as your main device is the ability to put your, this is not loading properly. I might have to switch to my iPhone. I'm not sure whether it's their internet connection here or something else. Just check this. Sorry? Oh, that's my little snitch activity indicator. It's actually downloading stuff, but it may just be the speed of the internet connection. My phone will be faster, so if I switch to that, this may disrupt our connection, unfortunately, Graham. I've got to unlock it. Because that'll be using my phone in preference, I think. No, I want to use iPhone only at the moment. So that'll lose my screenshot, unfortunately. Right, if I refresh that page now, my iPhone will be, yeah, that's better, thank you. So I think it's just the church's Wi-Fi data connection is a bit limited. Okay, so being able to work with the same app across multiple spaces. So if you've used Spaces on the Mac or multiple desktops, it's the same concept. So you can have, currently on the iPad, an app can only be in one place, but you'll effectively be able to create workspaces on the iPad where the same app can be in several of them at once. Plus you can have two documents open at once in the same app side by side or in different spaces. So that will make it easier to work with multiple documents. Currently, on an iPad app, you're allowed to, if you use the split view where you've got two apps side by side, they have to be different apps. So there are silly workarounds. If you want to look at two web pages or something side by side, people have created a third-party app which is basically Safari in disguise, just so you can have it sitting alongside your normal Safari. That won't be necessary anymore because you can now have two separate windows open in Safari rather than just two tabs which you're toggling between. So similarly, you can have two Word documents or two Pages documents or something like that. Or you can have Pages with whatever else you want to work on here and then switch to a new space and have another Pages document with something else that you're working on. So there's much more flexibility there. That's basically the expose feature is similar to what was already there. The widgets on the home screen. So if you've already used an iPad or an iPhone, you know about the Today view, which has got widgets that you can choose what goes in there. You can move them onto the home screen, so you actually have things permanently displayed there while you're looking at the main screen. Plus the grid is being squashed, so rather than it being a iPhone growing bigger and bigger, you've got more reasonable spacing between the icons so you can fit more on the screen. So that's better layout and more options for what you can actually put on the screen, so that's good. Apple Pencil stuff is going to become even more widespread, so the palettes are going to be available in more applications using the standard one, plus they can be relocated, they're not at the bottom, they can go elsewhere around the screen, which makes it easy to work with things if there's something in the way. So having an Apple Pencil will be more useful in the new version. The sidecar feature was already mentioned. On an iPad, if you currently use the same model as the iPhone, if you tap and hold, you get a little magnifying glass for text selection. That's going away on the iPad only, so it will now be tap and the cursor just moves to wherever you're pointing. So it doesn't actually have the magnifying glass, and if you double tap on something, it selects a chunk of text, triple tap to select a sentence, quadruple click for a paragraph, that sort of thing. So it's similar to the sort of gestures to the Mac. Plus they're introducing new gestures for undo, cut, copy and paste, which you can use if you want to. That's copy, that's paste. So it's like spread, and imagine you picking up something and putting it down again. So it's like I think it's a 3-finger minimum, or might be 4-finger. You can use 4 fingers if you like. So you basically pinch to pick up to copy, and then spread out to paste. If you want to cut, I think you do the same thing twice. So it does basically that way twice, and then that to paste. Undo is 3 fingers that way. Redo is 3 fingers that way, which makes sense. So it makes it easier to do a lot of editing tasks than it was before. Pick up the cursor and drag it precisely where you want it, that sort of thing. Oh yeah, so you don't actually have to drag it, you can actually sort of relocate it. Multi-select, intelligent text selection. Floating keyboard, if you like using one thumb to type, you can now shrink the keyboard down to one side of the screen, which you could do in earlier versions and they got rid of. Plus they've added swipe gestures on the keyboards. You don't actually have to go tap, tap, tap. You can slide from key to key, which some third-party keyboards already offer, so that's a built-in feature now. If you use an external keyboard, there's a lot more Mac-like keyboard shortcuts available, so that you have more editing controls and various other things. If you want to be able to create documents with fonts of your choice rather than the limited set that you're given, you can now install fonts on an iPad and an iPhone as it happens. And those will actually be available effectively like an app from the App Store, which you can buy a font and install it on the iPad and use it in any app that supports standard fonts. So if you're needing to work with professional specific fonts for professional publications, then they'll be available. Be still my beating heart. Finally, you'll have the ability to plug in an external storage device and modify the files on it, not just import photos from it. So if you have an iPad with a USB camera adapter or a SD card reader, you can plug the card in there and you'll be able to use the Files app to manipulate what's on there. You can copy files to and from it, you can rename files, you can create folders, all those sorts of typical stuff you expect to be able to do. It's only taken how many years to get this feature? So this will extend to not just USB flash drives, SD cards, given the right adapter. If you have an iPad Pro of the current generation, it's got a USB-C port, so you can just plug a USB-C flash drive straight into it. There's no adapter required. Older models will require a appropriate type of adapter, so you'll need to buy the camera adapter of the USB or SD card type. If you wanted to plug an external hard drive in, that will work, except for the fact that hard drives need a lot of power, and the iPad can't provide much power through its connector. So if you want to actually access files on a hard drive, you'll probably need a variant of the adapter, which has got an external power input. So, for recent iPads, there has been, if I can find the right one, not the power adapter, didn't get this out earlier. There it is. What's called the USB 3 camera adapter, I think. So it's got a lightning connector on that end, which plugs into your iPad. It's got a USB port and a lightning socket on that side. So you plug your iPad power adapter into the lightning socket, and you plug your USB device into the USB port. And that power is able to power the iPad and power the USB port. So with this adapter, in theory, I should be able to access a hard drive or something like that from an iPad, an existing iPad that's able to run iOS 13, iPad OS 13. That's the camera, the SD card reader equivalent. So that one's just an SD card, nothing
That's
else.
quite an old one, isn't it?
That's,
It's been around a while.
I think, the same one. So they have a USB 2 and a
We used to
USB.
have an SD
Yeah.
one.
They have a USB 2 and a USB 3 version of the other one. And I'm not sure if I've got the USB 2 one handy, but the USB 2 version of this doesn't have the power input, it's only got the USB socket. So that one would not work with a hard drive because the iPad can't provide enough power for it. I don't know if it worked with one of these either because they need a fair amount of power as well, so the bigger solid state drives. But that sort should be fine. The other thing you can do is access file servers. So you can, if you've got a server on your network or a NAS or something like that, you can easily access files on that from your iPad and copy files to and from it, which is better than you could before. If you use iCloud Drive, you'll be able to share folders with other people on iCloud Drive. So that means if you're familiar with using Dropbox to share documents or folders with other people, the same capability pretty much is coming to iCloud Drive, which is a good thing because Dropbox is about to go absolutely silly because they're in the process of introducing a new version which is effectively installing an entire web browser just to give you a user interface, which I'm not looking forward to, so I'm probably going to stop using Dropbox soon because their software is going to be horrible. So good timing. External drives, mentioned that. iPads are going to get effectively the Mac version of Safari, so there'll be a desktop browser on the iPad, not a mobile browser scaled up to the big screen. This means that websites that are expecting you to do something on a desktop browser will not give you the wrong version of the web page anymore. So for example, Google Docs will work in the browser on an iPad, whereas at the moment it doesn't. That sort of thing. You can download files in Safari and they'll be in your files application, they'll be a downloads folder. So effectively, the number of things you can suddenly do on the iPad that make it more plausible to use it as a computer replacement, it's getting to the point where it's actually looking quite feasible. And you don't necessarily need to buy a new iPad, as long as you've got an iPad Air 2 or later, it will be able to run a new operating system and do all this stuff. So I'm looking forward to it. Yay, dark mode. If you like your screens being darker rather than lighter, you can change the colour scheme. This seems to be the major feature that Apple's pushing, which doesn't really appeal to me all that much. This sign in with Apple thing looks very good as well. If you've used websites that have a button which says sign in with Google or sign in with Facebook, or apps that have got a similar feature so you don't have to create a new account, basically Apple's giving you the option of doing the same thing with your Apple ID, and Apple provides the account information without giving away more information than is necessary. So they're making it as private as they possibly can. The apps can use this. They may want your name. If they want your email address, Apple is giving you the option of generating a random email address for that app only, hosted by Apple, which forwards to your real email address, so that the app developer will never know your real email address. That's very clever.
They're certainly getting much more protective.
Yeah,
versus
yeah, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but particularly with the Facebook one, if you use Sign with Facebook, that requires that the app developer give Facebook vast amounts of information to gather about you. So Sign in with Apple is going to give them practically no information, and many of the developers don't actually want all this information, but they happen to give because it's so convenient, they can just drop the stuff in their application and support Facebook. It's easy for them to do it, so they do it without really realising the consequences. The other interesting point is that Apple is going to impose a requirement that any application which has sign in with Google or sign in with Facebook or other third-party providers must also have a sign in with Apple option going forward. So existing applications probably that won't apply to, but as soon as they do an update, they've got to include sign in with Apple. It's also going to be available on websites, so that's more optional. So you'll be able to access this on older operating systems to some extent on web pages as well. And I'm going to use this wherever I can because it means I don't have to create yet another account on a website that I don't want to have to remember the details for or create a random password for or whatever it might be. So it's all protected through Apple and it's all highly secure and I like it. Won't go into HomeKit stuff. Photos we've already talked about, that's the same features. Performance, iPad OS is even faster. So partly because they've now required more memory, it means they can do more stuff. Face ID unlocks faster, the Apple Pencil is faster, apps launch faster, the downloads are smaller and therefore will be faster. So there's lots and lots of speed improvements. Augmented reality stuff, they had a very cute demo which had a person walking through an AR scene with things moving in front of them and things like that. What they didn't say in the keynote is that to do that you needed the latest generation device with an A12 processor because the older ones can't do it, but oh well, progress eventually. Yes, well, it was all an artificial room. It was basically a person standing on the stage, but that was all done virtually. There was they couldn't actually see the person. They were just in the scene, but they'd be standing in any room at all. It wasn't necessarily what it looked like behind them. The background scenes, the foreground scenes, the plane flying in front of them, that sort of thing was quite cute. So all sorts of features there. Now, I've run out of time, so I'm not going to go through all the iOS stuff, but in effect, iOS on that, this is the iPhone now only, assume most of the iPad features are there except the ones that are related to multitasking and multiple apps. So effectively it's the same sort of feature set. So you get dark mode, you get the photos improvements, you get there's some camera enhancements, some not the editing stuff either. The text editing is all going to be the same on the iPhone because they're only doing that on the big screened iPads. They were talking about map stuff, but it's really dependent on the data being available, which won't be available in New Zealand for a while, so I haven't really bothered talking about that. Siri, that was quite nice. The voice they were generating for Siri is now completely artificially generated as a whole sentence, rather than being pieced together from individual words, and it sounded an awful lot better. The example they gave wasn't a very good one because it was a very technical phrase, but it was quite much easier to understand than the old version was. The shortcut stuff is built in, which is an optional install previously, and it's all integrated much more easily, and you can parameterize things. I haven't got my brain around that stuff even in the current version yet. But effectively, you want to automate frequent tasks, it'll get even easier. Is the idea there. If you want to create Memoji, there's even more stuff you can do to those. Swipe keyboards there. The reminders improvements are there. All sorts of stuff. CarPlay, if you've got a CarPlay capable car or head unit. Performance improvements are all there. Augmented reality stuff is there, etc. So lots and lots of new features. I haven't even got to WatchOS, which has got some nice new features as well. But as I said, I gave you links in the article. You can go and read these pages yourself. I'm just using it as a guideline to give you some idea of the more important ones. So I made sure I covered the major stuff in my article. If you want to reread that, have a look at the Apple pages. The information overload extent that I've had to suffer from the last month is phenomenal because just the keynote and then a constant barrage of new stuff appearing on every day ever since, just trying to keep up with all the stuff has been very tricky. There's an awful lot of new stuff coming, but it's early days yet, and they're nowhere near end user quality until hopefully it won't be too buggy by the time it comes out in September. But I would say, as usual, my advice is don't rush into upgrading your Macs. Your iPhones maybe will be less problematic. iPads, somewhere between the two. Hard to tell yet, but hope we'll get a clearer picture in the next month
More
or two.
computer-like they get.
Yeah. But it's more the degree of difficulty you're likely to run into because the number of magnitudes of changes and compatibility problems, that sort of thing, which is more common on Macs because of a lot more older software around, I think. Any questions?
I have one little wee one, it's
Yep.
nothing to do with this.
Ah.
When you're doing backups on an external hard drive, what file format or language or whatever you do?
File system, it depends what you're doing. Are you using Time Machine or something else?
No, just on external hard drives. Oh yes, through Time Machine.
If you're using Time Machine, it will always use Apple's macOS extended file system at the moment. So that's also known as HFS Plus, so Apple doesn't call it that in the user interface.
Extended.
If it's the wrong file system, Time Machine will complain at you and tell you it needs to reformat the drive, and it will then.
Because I looked at my 3 external hard drives and I think they're all slightly different.
Well, probably there's. If you're manually formatting the drive,
I'm not sure whether I did or not.
no, just be aware that there are some subtle different ones. If I go and choose this and go erase and not erase it, there's.
Journaled. That's,
No. I
yeah,
want
it
to-
was choosing which one of those.
Yeah,
was the
basically,
difficulty.
I want to change that to that, and then okay, that's the full list there. That's usually the right one to use, macOS Extended Journaled. You should definitely not use the case-sensitive ones, because that is problematic. Your main drive should not be case sensitive because some applications can't handle it. If your backup drive is case sensitive and you restore it, it will cause your main drive to be case sensitive. So that option basically means you can have 2 files in the same folder which only differ in the fact they've got a capital or lowercase letter in the same position. So like my document with a capital D or my document with a lowercase d, that for example. So don't use those ones. The encrypted option you can choose or not as you see fit. I tend to use encrypted for all my backup drives if my main drive is encrypted. But it's more complicated to set up in the first place. Once it's set up, it's easy to use as normal. But it's I can guide you through the process if you need to do that.
No, I think most of them are extended journal.
Yep.
I couldn't remember for sure.
Yep. But at the moment,
I knew they weren't MS-DOS.
Yep. Time Machine can't use that as its format yet. APFS, the new file system.
So there wasn't any.
Even in the
options
next
on
operating system, it's still using macOS Extended, it appears,
Yeah.
though Apple's getting close to the point where they'll be able to switch to using APFS in a future OS, but not the next one.
that. Okay.
And those two are obviously out because they're not appropriate. But if you tried to use one of them, Time Machine would tell you it needs to reformat the drive. So
And ordinary SD cards.
SD cards should generally be that one, MS-DOS FAT, if you're going to exchange them with anything other than a Mac.
No.
If they're gonna-
for a Mac.
If they're going to be used only on Macs, then that same option, Mac
So I've
OS
got a
Extended
number
Journal.
of those that we used to use for photos, and we used to plug them into the.
Right, because if they're plugged into a camera, they've got to be that format, MS-DOS FAT. If they come from a camera originally.
No, because we've got other ones as well.
Right, because
Much bigger ones.
basically if they're moving between a PC and a Mac or a camera and a Mac or any other device and a Mac, they've got to be that format. So, for example, if you want to copy photos onto it and take it down to Warehouse Stationery and plug it into one of their computers, one of their devices to print the photos, it's got to be in that format as well. So don't use macOS Extended except for devices that you know are never going to go near anything other than a Mac. So, for example, my collection of USB flash drives, that one's got OS installers, that's Mac formatted. That one is my Mac only data transfer flash drive, so that one's Mac formatted. That is my Windows and Mac compatible flash drive, which I use for transferring to anything, that's Windows MS-DOS FAT formatted. So I keep one of each just to make sure I've got them, I know which one they are because I picked different looking ones, so I can tell them apart.
So, just carrying on that discussion, if I want to use those for ordinary files, how do you set up an SD card for that?
That's
Mac OS
extended, same one.
Same
Yep.
one.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
I'd recommend avoiding APFS unless you know what you're doing at the moment, especially as it only works on recent operating system versions.
Yeah.
So that's the best one to choose usually. In fact, I'll cancel that. I don't want to erase you. Come on, cancel. That particular drive I've actually didn't bother erasing it correctly, so it's got oh no, it is right. It's got the GUID partition map. Yep. If I go eject, yep, that disappears in Finder as an SD card in my slot. So it's got all my archived files that I didn't want to keep in my main drive to save some space. So in fact, if I eject that, it's actually a little low profile adapter.
What format have you got that one in, David?
A Mac OS format, because it's only got Mac stuff on it. So well, technically it doesn't, but it won't let me eject it. Of course, it's just something's using it and it won't tell me what. So that's a recurring problem I get, which usually I can only solve by restarting the computer or waiting long enough. I can't take it out to show you, but it's basically a little wee specially sized adapter that matches the size of the SD slot in this model, and it's got a micro SD card in it. So that's a 256 gig micro SD card I've got with more storage space on it. But I won't be able to use that in my next computer because it's probably not going to have an SD card slot.
The terminology for the Mac OS Extended, is that the format?
Mac OS Extended is the format.
Is the
yes.
format?
Yep. The journal option, by the way, just means that it's got extra protection against losing information if the drive gets ejected suddenly. It will protect some of the directory information, so it's less likely to get corrupted. That's what the journal bit means. So that's not particularly. That's just a useful feature to have. It doesn't protect the data. It just protects the directory information.
Thanks, Dave.
Yep.
Thanks very much.
Yep. Okay. We better stop because we're keeping everybody late. Thank you, folks.
Thank you. Sensory overload.